morning. So you're all wondering what today's candy is, right? We've kept you going for 6 straight weeks, and now you come anticipating something. Isn't that awesome? Well, who wants a Lifesaver? Who wants a Lifesaver? You know, a sugary candy, perfectly colored and flavored. Something everybody needs in the morning, a little pick-me-up. A little sugar to get us going during the day. See, this is why you like coming to church. It's candy every Sunday. You can't beat it. Next week it's going to be breakfast sandwiches. Now, I do have to admit, I was a little worried about having baskets of Lifesavers and handing them out, because I figured you guys would do the same thing the youth do. Not that one. Not that one. I want this color. There's so many different colors and flavors to Lifesavers. Don't we all need a Lifesaver once in a while? You know, the Lifesavers were actually something that saved someone's life. Clarence Crane, back in 1912, was struggling because his chocolate confectionery business was having a problem. You see, it was difficult to make chocolate in the heat of the summer back in 1912. And it was even more difficult to then deliver it. Because you can imagine, if you got a chocolate Easter bunny, it was more like a chocolate blob by the time you got it. So he had to create something new and different, so he created a hard mint candy. But then there was another problem for poor Mr. Crane. He didn't have any way to manufacture this candy that he had created. So he enlists the help of a pill manufacturer, because they had the right kind of equipment. And once they got started making these wonderful hard mint candies, the equipment broke down. But then they discovered the best way to make this hard mint candy was to stamp it with a hole in the middle, and then all the machinery would work. It wouldn't get clogged up. So there you have it. Crane's Lifesavers. They saved his business. And here we are a few hundred years later, right? With Lifesavers of all different flavors and colors and sizes and all different wrappings. Mr. Crane was looking for something to save his business. And I think each of us in our own way is looking for something to save us. There's a story of a mom by the name of Lori Capps, and she lives in Virginia. She has an 8-year-old daughter who's her only child. And she often notices that when she puts Gracie to sleep at night, she can hear whispering and talking going on behind the door in her bedroom. Sometimes she hears Gracie's footsteps down the hallway, and she knows she's going out to look for her favorite doll or stuffed animal to get ready to fall asleep. Well, one day she overheard Gracie whispering, and she poked her head in the bedroom, and she says, "No, what are you doing?" She said, "Well, Mommy, I'm playing hide and seek with God." Well, Mom laughed, of course, and she felt this was a good time to have a teaching moment. And so she said, "Well, Gracie, honey, don't you think that God can find you anywhere you hide?" So Gracie, she just put her back up straight, she rolled her eyes, and she said, "Mom, I'm looking for God." Each of us in our own way is looking for something in our lives. And for some, this search, it ends very quickly and easily, and for others, it's a lifelong journey. But the good news is that we can find God through Jesus Christ, the one who took on human form and flesh and blood, the one who became a member of God's family. And when we find Jesus Christ, then we cease to becoming an only child in this world, and we become part of the family of faith. Brothers and sisters, I believe each and every one of us at some time is looking, searching. Over the past 6 weeks here, we've been exploring scriptures and we've been hearing God's sweet, sweet words. Our theme verse, Psalm 119, how sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Hearing God's sweet words is very important to us, and I imagine that's why many of you come to church on Sunday. The Apostle Paul was well aware of this when he wrote the letter to Christians who were living in Rome. Romans chapter 10, verse 15 reads, "And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news." Yes, it is important to hear God's sweet, sweet words, but we have to ask, who's going to be telling those words? John Wesley, the founder of our church, way back in the 18th century, he was setting off on a whole new revival from the Catholic Church. And this revival had swept through England and had crossed the pond and was now in America. And he needed help. So he enlisted a man by the name of Thomas Coke, and he put Thomas Coke on a ship, and just before the ship left the harbor, Mr. Wesley said to him, "You're going off to lead a rapidly growing church in a brand new world, in a place that's unknown, someplace we call the United States." And he said, "I only have 3 words of advice for you. Offer them Christ." His simple advice might remind some of you of a familiar reporter interview that happened just a couple years ago. The reporter interviewed a woman by the name of Mother Teresa. And when she was asked to sum up her whole life's work, this is how she said it: "I give them Jesus." Paul's letter to Rome says the same message. Mother Teresa, she was the leader of the Sisters of Charity in Calcutta, Indiana. Her life was celebrated by the world as her funeral was televised around the globe. Millions upon millions watched. And in that single act, there were signs of hope and peace, because you see, the government was officially Hindu. And yet they gave Mother Teresa a state funeral. There's hope for peace in our world. Documentaries about her life have told us that she received the Nobel Peace Prize because she inspired so many to care for the least of these. If you ask anyone who worked beside her, they said that she was always in the ministry of Jesus. And it was Jesus who inspired her. There was a church leader who went to visit with Mother Teresa and to interview her and to try and find out the inner workings of a woman like her. So he went to her and he asked, what was her secret, if you can imagine? He asked Mother Teresa what was the secret of her compassion for the dying and the dirty people of our world. She said her secret was Jesus. He asked, well, how does Jesus give you the power to do such kind of work in caring for these people that no one else will even touch? She said, come with me, and I want to introduce you to Jesus himself. Well, you can imagine, the leader of the church, he was completely enthralled, and he thought this was going to be an exciting time, and so he follows Mother Teresa out of the chapel and across the trail and into a very large room. And in this room was a large number of cots filled with dying people. She takes the gentleman right up to a cot of an elderly man who had just been brought in from the street, and he was dying. He was dirty. He was poor. And the odor that came from his body was absolutely suffocating. Mother Teresa knelt down next to that cot, and she grabbed the man in her arms. She hugged him and she said, I love you. Then she looked up at the man from the church and she said, I want you to meet someone. I want you to meet Jesus. In a dying man, I see and meet Jesus, my Savior. Wasn't it Jesus who said in the Gospel of Matthew, insomuch as you did it unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. Mother Teresa knew what she was doing because of Jesus. And she will tell you right away that Jesus is the one who saved her. And because Jesus lives inside her, she loves others. This is a very familiar story of many of the saints we've studied in our church history. They say there is no more important work for them to do than to share their faith with others. I wonder if we believe this to be true today. In the times of email and texting and when our conversations are 140 characters or less, do we believe? Do we believe in our hearts that God was raised from the dead and that we are now saved? Do we believe that the same Lord is Lord of all and is generous to all who call on him? And as Paul wrote, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. It's important that we share. Because we all need a life savior. It's important because we all know that when our human resources are absolutely exhausted, we find that Jesus is our lifesaver. We find he is the one who inspires and encourages us to go on. You know, yesterday I did something pretty crazy. I joined a group of other people and I paddled down the Delaware River. I paddled for 5.5 hours. 31 miles. We paddled from Camden all the way down to Wilmington, Delaware. We were raising funds for Urban Promise, which is the inner city group that I've been telling you about, and they've been here to witness to us about all they do for the youth. And I noticed that with all the people I was with, some were highly trained, very good experts, and some had just gotten in the boat like me. But we all had familiarity with the water. And so we all knew very well how to swim and how to float and to put our heads back. We knew all that, but we still had to wear a life jacket. You know, and they were very cumbersome, and they got in the way of working that paddle back and forth across that outrigger. I thought, why are we wearing life jackets? But after being so exhausted for 5.5 hours of paddling, to have a freighter come down the Delaware River and go by you, they're big. They cause waves. And sometimes big boats with big waves will tip over a little boat. Thank God for life jackets. Because I don't care how much you know how to swim, when you are tired and exhausted, it's too hard to swim. If you're experienced, and some of these people had been on world-renowned regattas, they had won world championship competitions, they came with their own specially designed paddles. That's how I knew I was in trouble. They still needed a life jacket. When we get exhausted, we need a lifesaver. Dr. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's one of the great Christian leaders and a German theologian, known as one of the founding fathers of Christianity as we know it today. He chose way back to leave his safe teaching position in America to go back to Germany during World War. And he went back for the specific purpose of opposing what Adolf Hitler was doing. Well, as you can imagine, he ended up in prison. A torturous prison. And just days before the war ended, he was executed. All the time while Dr. Bonhoeffer was in prison, he wrote notes on anything he could get his hands on to write. He smuggled them out through all the prison guards to get them out to his followers. These writings have survived through the years, and today they're printed in many of his books and writings. And in many of them there was this poem that was called, "Who Am I?" In this poem, he shares his doubts and his sufferings while he was in prison. But he ends the poem in a very strange way. And this is how he ended, "Who am I? I am yours, O God." He was one that was going through the most difficult time that you and I could possibly imagine, and every time he wrote, he gave his life to Jesus Christ. He was able to find courage and strength and faith, and yes, even love for those who were persecuting him through his relationship with Jesus. I believe when you and I face what we think are daily challenges and struggles in our lives, it's Christ who gives us the energy. It's Christ who lifts us up out of that water. It is Christ who gives us the energy and endurance to move on. You know, another reason that it's important for us to be able to share this word and to spread the sweetness of God is because we all know something that we've experienced and we've seen other people experience. And that's the fulfillment when we have Jesus in our lives. There's a story about a gentleman by the name of Bob Mayfield. Bob was named by his youth group in church as the one person who reminded them most of Jesus Christ. That's a pretty tall order. But Bob tells the story a little differently. See, he confesses that he had not always been in control of himself. In fact, years earlier, he was very hard to get along with. He loved his work, and so much it meant that no one could do as good a job as Bob. So much so that his coworkers began to hate him and detest him. He couldn't work with anyone else because no one was good enough. And then he began to hate those people who just didn't meet his standards. He says that hate, that dislike of my fellow colleagues and my fellow man, it caused me to have health problems. He believes it caused a tumor in his brain. A tumor that grew so large that he lost the use of his right hand. Well, one day, Bob's in the hospital. And as you can imagine, he's facing surgery and all the things that go along with that, and he's very, very scared. Bob's pastor called him on the phone just before surgery. And Bob recalls, it was very nice to hear my pastor's voice. It gave me a sense of peace and calm. My pastor asked me if I was ready for the surgery, and I said, well, of course. I am in the finest hospital with the finest doctors we could find. They've done this surgery many times before. The nurses and the technicians are absolutely wonderful. And Bob's pastor said, no, that's not what I asked. What I asked was, are you ready? Because this may not turn out the way you're thinking. Before Bob knew it, they were quickly into a discussion about the end of life and meeting God after death. Bob realized he needed some help treading water in the deep end of life's pool. So he asked his pastor, can you help me to get ready now? His pastor read a Bible passage, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Bob and his pastor discussed the meaning of the verse, and then they read the same verse again, but the pastor said, this time, Bob, I'd like you to put your name into this verse. I'd like you to put Bob in wherever it says world or whosoever. And so they read the same verse again. For God so loved Bob Mayfield that he gave his only begotten Son, that if Bob Mayfield would believe in him, Bob Mayfield would not perish, but have everlasting life. Bob says it was at that moment that Jesus Christ saved him. He says from there, that change wasn't just something we spoke about, it was real. So real that today, the youth in Bob's church call him the man most like Christ. You know, it seems like every day, somewhere, someplace, someone is offering to share something, right? Do you want a piece of gum? Do you want a mint? How about a Lifesaver? I think we owe a debt to the people who have been willing to share with us the love of Jesus Christ. And those people are still sharing today, just as you will now begin to share the sweet, sweet words. Words that we now know today. Now we know why we need to be sharing them with others. You know, I'd like you to do something with me this morning. I'd like to read John 3:16 again. And I'd like you to read it with me. But when I pause, I'd like you to say your own name. Join with me. For God so loved Tom that he gave his only begotten Son, that if Tom would believe in him, Tom would not perish, but have everlasting life. Who needs a lifesaver? We all do. Who's carrying the life preserver? We all are. We need to share it.